Professor adjusted her crystalline breathing apparatus as she watched the addition to her xenobiology class settle into the specially reinforced chair. The human called himself, and he represented the first exchange student from the infamous known as Earth. The Galactic Educational Council had approved this experimental program despite significant opposition from safety committees across 12 star systems. Appeared deceptively calm as 37 pairs of alien eyes studied him with mixtures of fascination and barely concealed terror. The students kept their distance, their feathered crests flattened against their skulls in submission postures. The silicon-based had actually increased their body density, creating small tremors in the floor as they unconsciously prepared for potential violence. Even the usually confident gas clouds had compressed themselves into formations near the ceiling vents. "Today we begin our study of predator-prey dynamics," Professor announced, her translator struggling with the concept since most civilized species had evolved past such primitive relationships millions of years ago. "As you know, most sapient life in the galaxy developed from herbivorous or filter-feeding ancestors. The concept of active hunting for sustenance is largely theoretical for us." A student named Yu raised a trembling wing arm. "Professor, is it true that actually consume other living beings?" Shifted slightly in his chair, causing half the class to flinch. "Not living," he said quietly, his voice carrying easily through the lecture hall despite its conversational tone. "We prefer our food dead first." The collective gasp that rippled through the classroom was audible even through the various atmospheric filters and breathing apparatus. A student near the back flickered between visible and invisible in what had learned was their species' equivalent of nervous laughter. Professor cleared her throat, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Perhaps we should begin with basic definitions. Would you be willing to share your perspective on predator classifications?" Nodded, seemingly unaware of how his simple movement sent waves of tension through his audience. "On Earth, we generally classify predators into several categories. Apex predators sit at the top of the food chain with no natural enemies as adults. Then you have your various levels of predators below that, each filling different ecological niches." A student, brave enough to speak despite their mineral composition making communication difficult, ground out a question. "Where do humans fit in this classification?" The silence that followed was profound. Considered the question seriously, his brown eyes scanning the faces around him. Most species in the galaxy had prey eyes, positioned on the sides of their heads to watch for threats. His eyes faced forward, the mark of a hunter. "That's actually a really good question," said, completely missing the way his casual tone made several students edge toward the exits. "Humans are interesting because we're not naturally apex predators in the traditional sense. We evolved as persistence hunters and scavengers. We're more like adaptable omnivores who became apex through tool use and cooperation." A student named Ra, who had been listening intently, suddenly spoke up. "But humans conquered their entire planet, every ecosystem, every environment. How is that not apex predation?" Rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture that looked threatening to species that interpreted sudden movements as aggression warnings. "I guess when you put it like that, yeah. We did kind of take over everything, but we're also the only species on our planet that actively works to preserve other species. We have entire organizations dedicated to protecting animals that could kill us." This statement caused what could only be described as mass confusion among the alien students. The concept of a predator species protecting its prey was so fundamentally alien to their understanding that several translators actually malfunctioned trying to process the logic. Professor, sensing an educational opportunity, moved to the center of the classroom. "This brings us to an important point about evolution. The constant pressure from environmental threats, predators, and resource competition creates species with seemingly contradictory traits. Perhaps you could elaborate on what you mean by preservation." Leaned forward slightly, and the movement was so fluid and controlled that it reminded everyone present why human body language was studied in military academies as a form of threat assessment. "Well, take tigers for example. They're massive predators that could easily kill a human, but we have programs to protect them from extinction. We relocate them when they conflict with human settlements. We fund research to understand their needs, and we've actually increased their population in some areas." The classroom fell silent except for the various mechanical breathing sounds and the soft humming of the environmental systems. A small student, barely visible even with the classroom's enhanced lighting, whispered a question that somehow reached every corner of the room. "You protect things that hunt you," smiled, an expression that revealed his teeth in a way that made every non-human in the room remember why showing teeth was considered a threat display across most of known space. "Sure. Why wouldn't we? They're beautiful, they're important to their ecosystems, and honestly, they're not really a threat to humans anymore. We're way more dangerous to them than they are to us." The casual way delivered this statement, the matter-of-fact acknowledgement that humans were more dangerous than creatures specifically evolved to kill, sent a ripple of what could only be called existential dread through the classroom. Several students had stopped taking notes entirely and were simply staring at him with the kind of fascination usually reserved for natural disasters or stellar phenomena. Professor decided to redirect the discussion before her students became completely catatonic. "Perhaps we should examine some specific examples. I have prepared several holographic displays of various predator species from across the galaxy." The first hologram flickered to life in the center of the classroom, showing a creature that resembled a cross between a spider and a small spacecraft. It had multiple articulated limbs, compound eyes, and what appeared to be natural weapon systems integrated into its biological structure. "This is a hunter from the sector," Professor explained. "It's considered one of the most efficient predators in known space, capable of tracking prey across multiple star systems." The alien students murmured appreciatively at the impressive display of evolutionary adaptation. Studied the hologram with interest, his head tilted slightly as he examined the creature's design. "Interesting," he said finally. "It's kind of like a cross between a jumping spider and a mantis shrimp. The compound eyes would give it excellent motion detection, and those articulated limbs suggest it's probably an ambush predator that relies on precision strikes." The way analyzed the fearsome predator like he was examining an interesting insect specimen was deeply unsettling to everyone present. Professor noted that several students had moved even further away from the human, despite the fact that he hadn't moved from his chair. "He is approximately 3 meters long and has been responsible for the evacuation of 17 research stations," she continued. "It's considered so dangerous that most species have banned travel to systems where they're known to exist." Nodded thoughtfully. "Makes sense. Ambush predators can be really dangerous in enclosed spaces. Does it hunt in packs?" The question caught Professor off guard. "I know they are solitary hunters. Why do you ask?" "Just wondering about pack dynamics. Group hunters require different countermeasures than solo operators." Paused, seemingly unaware that he had just casually discussed tactics for fighting one of the galaxy's most feared predators. "What does it typically hunt?" A student named, who had been quietly recording the entire conversation for what he claimed was a research project, but was probably actually evidence for whatever protective services his species maintained, spoke up nervously. "The primarily hunt starship crews. They infiltrate vessels during dock procedures and systematically eliminate all occupants." His expression shifted slightly, and for the first time since entering the classroom, every student present got a glimpse of why humans were classified as a species. His eyes focused with laser intensity, his posture changed subtly but noticeably, and something predatory flickered across his features. "They hunt sapient beings," he said, and his tone had dropped several degrees in temperature. The change in was so dramatic that several students instinctively activated personal defense systems. The students increased their density further, creating small stress fractures in the floor. They flattened themselves against their seats, and the gas clouds dispersed almost to invisibility. Professor realized she had stumbled onto something significant. "Yes, they have been responsible for thousands of casualties over the past century. They're considered one of the primary reasons for the enhanced security protocols on all civilian vessels." Was quiet for a long moment, and the silence felt dangerous in a way that none of the students could quite articulate. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an edge that made the environmental system seem louder in comparison. "So they're not just predators, they're killers." The distinction he made was lost on most of the class, but Professor understood immediately. In human terminology, there was apparently a significant difference between hunting for survival and killing for sport or malice. She realized she was witnessing something that had theorized but never observed, a human's instinctive response to a perceived threat to sapient life. "They don't consume their prey," she explained carefully. "They kill for territorial reasons or possibly as a form of play behavior." The temperature in the room seemed to drop another few degrees. Stillness was now the kind of motionlessness that prey species evolved specifically to fear, the calm before explosive violence. "Play behavior," he repeated, and somehow those two words carried more menace than most species could manage with elaborate threat displays. A small student, apparently operating on the principle that sometimes the most dangerous questions were the most important ones, asked in a barely audible whisper, "What would happen if a human encountered?" Looked directly at the small student, and his smile was nothing like the friendly expression he had shown earlier. This smile was sharp, cold, and carried promises of violence that made several students seriously consider leaving the building. "That," he said quietly, "would depend entirely on whether I saw it first." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Professor's assistant, quietly updating the security protocols for the classroom. 3 days after the classroom discussion about predators, Professor announced a field trip to the Galactic Biological Preserve on station. The preserve housed specimens from across known space, including some of the most dangerous predators ever cataloged. It was considered the ultimate educational experience for xenobiology students, though most species required extensive psychological preparation before visiting. Packed his simple day bag while his alien classmates gathered elaborate protection gear, emergency communicators, and in some cases, what appeared to be full environmental suits. The students had requisitioned a group protection bubble that could maintain their specific atmospheric requirements while providing barrier protection from any potential threats. "Are you certain you don't require any protective equipment?" Professor asked as they boarded the transport vessel. Her crystalline features reflected concern as she noted his casual attire, simple clothing that offered no obvious protection from environmental hazards or aggressive fauna. Shrugged, a gesture that had become less startling to his classmates over the past few days, though it still caused some nervous wing fluttering among the. "I've got everything I need," he said, patting a small pack that contained what appeared to be basic supplies and some kind of multi-tool. The journey to station took several hours, during which spent most of his time looking out the viewports at the passing stars while his classmates reviewed safety protocols and emergency procedures. A student named Boulders had downloaded the complete threat assessment database for every creature they might encounter, cross-referenced with evacuation routes and medical emergency procedures. "Human," Boulders ground out in their species' distinctive mineral-on-metal voice, "have you reviewed the safety documentation? Some of these creatures have killed trained." Turned from the viewport, his movements smooth and controlled in the way that still made everyone slightly nervous. "I skimmed it. Mostly standard stuff. Don't approach unknown species, maintain safe distances, follow guide instructions. Same rules that apply to any wildlife preserve." The casual way he dismissed creatures that had required military intervention to contain was both impressive and deeply unsettling to his fellow students. Unnamed, currently maintaining a loosely humanoid form, flickered with what their species considered anxious coloration. "But these aren't ordinary wildlife," pulsed in carefully modulated electromagnetic frequencies. "The acid spitters from Vega Prime can dissolve most known materials. The shadow stalkers from the Omega Nebula can phase through solid matter. The from..." Interrupted gently, and the gas cloud being immediately fell silent. "I understand these are dangerous creatures, but they're contained, right? Professional handlers, secure enclosures, safety protocols." Professor nodded, though her crystalline structure showed stress fractures that indicated significant concern. "Yes, the preserve maintains the highest safety standards in known space. However, there have been incidents." Raised an eyebrow, an expression that somehow conveyed both interest and a complete lack of concern that was mildly terrifying to everyone watching. "What kind of incidents?" A student named, who had been silent for most of the journey, spoke up from within the protective bubble. "Last year, a shadow stalker escaped containment during a research expedition. It killed 3 and 2 security officers before they managed to recontain it." "How did they get it back?" asked, and there was something in his tone that made everyone pay attention. "Military strike team with phased plasma weapons and quantum containment fields," Professor replied. "The operation took 14 hours and required evacuating 3 sectors of the station." nodded thoughtfully as if filing away tactical information for future reference. And the shadow stalker, what's its normal hunting pattern? The question caught everyone off guard because it wasn't the sort of thing most people asked when discussing dangerous escaped predators. Normal people asked about casualty rates or evacuation procedures. They didn't ask about hunting patterns as if they were planning to track the creature themselves. Boulder's mineral composition shifted nervously. The shadow stalker is an ambush predator that can phase between dimensional layers. It typically stalks prey for extended periods before manifesting in solid form to attack. Its kills are distinctive. Distinctive how? His voice had taken on that edge again, the one that made the temperature seem to drop several degrees. Professor realized that was categorizing threats in a way that was fundamentally different from how her other students processed information. While they focused on avoiding danger, appeared to be analyzing combat scenarios. The shadow stalker doesn't kill for food, she explained carefully. It kills methodically, often displaying its victims in arranged patterns that suggest intelligence and artistic sensibility. Was quiet for several minutes, his brown eyes focused on something none of the others could see. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but carried an undertone that made everyone present suddenly very glad he was on their side. So it's not just a predator, it's a sadist. The word translated poorly into most galactic languages, but the concept was clear enough to send ripples of unease through the transport vessel. Several students began reviewing emergency protocols with renewed intensity. Station was massive, a sprawling structure that housed thousands of species in carefully controlled environments. The biological preserve occupied an entire section, with multiple levels dedicated to different evolutionary classifications. Their first stop was the herbivore section, which found genuinely interesting but his classmates considered safely boring. The gentle grazing creatures from various worlds moved slowly through environments designed to mimic their home ecosystems. Asked thoughtful questions about evolutionary adaptations and symbiotic relationships that impressed Professor with their insight. His classmates began to relax slightly as they watched him interact with harmless creatures that posed no threat to anyone. The peaceful browsers from Tau Prime are fascinating, Professor explained as they watched a herd of creatures that resembled a cross between elephants and butterflies. They've evolved a completely symbiotic relationship with their environment. They actually improve the ecosystems they inhabit. Watch the creatures with obvious appreciation. They're beautiful. Do they face any natural predators on there? None, Professor replied. Tau Prime is what we call a garden world, no aggressive species, no environmental threats, perfect conditions for peaceful evolution. Nodded, but something in his expression suggested he found this information both wonderful and somehow sad. Must be nice, he said quietly. No fear, no violence, no survival pressure. A student named Wright, emboldened by gentle interaction with the herbivores, asked a question that had been troubling them. Do you miss it? The violence, I mean, do humans require conflict to be satisfied? The question was more perceptive than any of them realized. Considered it seriously while watching a young, peaceful browser investigate a flowering plant with obvious delight. That's complicated, he said finally. Humans have violent instincts, yeah, but we also have protective instincts, curiosity, empathy, the desire to create and build. Most of us find ways to channel the aggressive stuff into sports, competition, problem-solving. We don't need real violence to be happy. He paused, watching the alien creatures in their perfect, safe environment. But if something threatened them, he gestured toward the peaceful browsers, something that wanted to hurt them for pleasure or sport, yeah, I'd probably find that real violence pretty satisfying. The way he said it, calm and matter-of-fact, sent a chill through the group that had nothing to do with the station's environmental systems. Their next stop was the predator section, and the atmosphere changed immediately. Security checkpoints, reinforced viewing areas, and automated defense systems created an environment that screamed danger to every prey instinct the students possessed. By contrast, seemed to perk up with interest. Now this is more like it, he said, and several students seriously considered whether the protective bubble was strong enough to contain whatever might do in the presence of actual predators. The first exhibit contained a creature called a Void Reaper from the dead system of Prime. It was a sleek, black organism about the size of a large shark, with multiple rows of crystalline teeth and what appeared to be organic weapon systems integrated into its biology. It moved through its enclosure with deadly grace, and its multifaceted eyes tracked the movement of the visitors with obvious intelligence. The Void Reaper is one of the most efficient killers ever cataloged, the automated tour guide explained in cheerfully educational tones. It can survive in vacuum, operates equally well in multiple atmospheric conditions, and has been responsible for the complete depopulation of 7 research stations. Studied the creature with obvious fascination while his classmates maintained maximum distance from the reinforced viewing barrier. The Void Reaper, apparently sensing something different about the human, swam closer to the transparent aluminum barrier and began following as he moved along the exhibit. "It's tracking you," observed with what was probably meant to be helpful concern. Nodded, completely unbothered by the attention of one of the galaxy's most feared predators. "Yeah, it knows I'm different from you guys, probably recognizing another apex predator." The casual way he classified himself alongside the nightmare creature in the tank was both fascinating and terrifying to everyone present. Professor made notes on her while trying not to think about the implications. "The Void Reaper kills for territory and resources," she explained, hopping to maintain some semblance of educational structure. "It's highly intelligent but completely alien in its thought processes. Communication has proven impossible." Tapped gently on the barrier, and the Void Reaper responded by pressing against the transparent aluminum from the other side. For a moment, human and alien predator regarded each other through the barrier, and everyone present was struck by the similarity in their movements, controlled, fluid, and utterly confident. "Has anyone tried music?" asked suddenly. "I beg your pardon?" Professor's translator had difficulty processing the apparently random question. Turned from the exhibit, leaving the Void Reaper floating motionless near the barrier as if waiting for him to return. "Music, rhythmic patterns, mathematical sequences. If it's as intelligent as you say, it might respond to abstract communication." The suggestion was so unexpected that no one had an immediate response. The idea that someone might want to communicate with a Void Reaper, rather than simply contain it, was revolutionary in a way that made several students question their fundamental understanding of predator-prey relationships. Before anyone could respond, an alarm began sounding throughout the facility. Emergency lights bathed the corridors in red, and automated announcements began broadcasting in 17 different languages. "Containment breach in Section 7. All visitors proceed immediately to designated safe zones. This is not a drill." The students erupted into controlled panic, following emergency procedures they had memorized but never expected to use. Professor began coordinating their evacuation while consulting her emergency protocols handbook. However, was moving in the opposite direction, toward Section 7. Professor called out, "The safe zones are this way." Paused and looked back at the group of alien students, all of whom were staring at him with expressions of disbelief and terror. "You guys get to safety. I'm going to see what's loose." "That's insane," shrieked from within the protective bubble. "The security teams are trained for this. You're just a student." Smiled, and this time everyone recognized the expression for what it was, the calm confidence of an apex predator that had just found its purpose. "Yeah," he said quietly, "but I'm a human student." And with that, he disappeared into the emergency-lit corridors, moving toward danger while every other sapient being in the facility was running away from it. Section 7 housed the preserve's most dangerous specimens, including the shadow stalker that had escaped the previous year. As moved through the emergency-lit corridors, he could hear the sounds of security teams coordinating their response over the communication systems. Their voices carried the kind of controlled fear that came from training to face something they desperately hoped they would never encounter. "Containment breach confirmed in Enclosure 7 Delta," a security coordinator was announcing. "Shadow Stalker is loose. All personnel evacuate to minimum safe distance. Military response team estimated arrival in 43 minutes. Paused at a junction in the corridor, listening to the sounds around him. Emergency systems hummed, environmental processors cycled through lockdown protocols, and somewhere in the distance, something was moving through the ventilation system with deliberate purpose. He pulled out his multi-tool and activated its scanner function, checking for dimensional phase variations that would indicate the Shadow Stalker's presence. The readings were erratic, showing phase shifts that suggested the creature was moving between dimensional layers, probably using the station's own structural framework as a dimensional anchor. Nodded to himself, recognizing the hunting pattern from the briefings he had reviewed during the transport journey. A security officer rounded the corner, moving in full tactical gear with weapons drawn. She was her carapace gleaming under the emergency lighting, compound eyes scanning for threats in multiple directions simultaneously. When she saw, she gestured frantically toward the evacuation route. "Civilian, this area is under lockdown. You need to get to the safe zones immediately." Held up his hands in a non-threatening gesture, though he noted that the had positioned herself between him and the direction the security teams were focusing their search. "I'm exchange student from Earth. I have some experience with dangerous wildlife." The security officer's translator struggled with the concept before delivering her response. "Sir, this isn't wildlife. This is a Class 5 extinction-level predator. Please evacuate immediately." "Has it killed anyone yet?" asked, and something in his tone made the security officer pause in her evacuation procedures. Not yet, but it's been loose for 17 minutes. The projection models suggest it's stalking someone. Shadow stalkers don't kill immediately. They study their prey first, learn their patterns, then strike when the victim is psychologically broken." Felt something cold settle in his chest. It's playing with someone. Multiple someones, probably. There are research teams trapped in 3 different sections. We can't risk extraction while it's phasing. It could materialize inside our rescue craft. Was quiet for a moment, processing tactical information while emergency alarms continued to blare around them. When he spoke, his voice carried the kind of calm certainty that made the security officer suddenly very glad she was wearing full armor. "I need access to the environmental control systems and a detailed schematic of Section 7. Sir, I can't authorize civilian involvement in." "Officer," interrupted gently, and the security officer fell silent. "My planet has creatures that make this shadow stalker look like a house pet. I've been hunting dangerous predators since I was 12 years old. Either you can help me track this thing down, or you can explain to those trapped research teams why you chose protocol over their lives." The officer stared at him through her compound eyes, and for the first time in her career, she found herself believing that maybe, just maybe, a single unarmed civilian might be more dangerous than the nightmare creature loose in the station. "Environmental controls are 3 levels down," she said finally. "But if you get yourself killed, I'm listing it as suicide by stupidity in my report." Grinned, an expression that reminded the officer why humans were classified as apex predators. "Fair enough. What's your name?" "Security Chief," she replied, already moving toward the Environmental Control Center. "And against my better judgment, I'm going to help you hunt a shadow stalker." The Environmental Control Center was a maze of holographic displays showing atmospheric conditions, dimensional stability readings, and structural integrity monitors throughout the station. Studied the data with the kind of focused intensity that had only seen in military tactical specialists. "There," he said, pointing to a series of dimensional phase variations that appeared to be moving in a deliberate pattern. "It's using the ventilation system to mask its dimensional signatures, but it's still creating disturbances in the local space-time fabric." His compound eyes focused on the readings was indicating. "How can you interpret this data? This requires years of specialized training." Shrugged, a gesture that had become familiar but no less unsettling. "Pattern recognition. Plus, this is basically the same tracking method we use for hunting cloaked ships in Earth's asteroid fields. Different technology, same principle." The casual way he compared tracking interstellar military vessels to hunting an escaped alien predator was both impressive and deeply concerning. Made a note to review Earth's military classifications in her spare time. "The Shadow Stalker appears to be moving toward Research Lab 7C, observed, tracing the dimensional disturbances on the holographic display. "That's where one of the trapped teams is located." "Confirmed," agreed, checking her tactical readouts. "Dr. Aura and 2 research assistants. They've been trapped for 26 minutes. Was already moving toward the exit. "How long does a shadow stalker typically stalk its prey before attacking?" "Anywhere from 30 minutes to several hours. It depends on how much psychological damage it wants to inflict. His expression darkened. Then we've got maybe 4 minutes before it makes its move. The journey to Research Lab 7C took them through corridors that showed signs of the Shadow Stalker's presence, scratches on the walls that shouldn't exist in normal dimensional space, electronics that flickered as if something had passed through their circuits, and an atmosphere that felt wrong in ways that most species couldn't articulate, but all of them could sense. However, moved through the affected areas with the confidence of someone who had spent his life in environments where invisible death lurked around every corner, found herself following his lead despite her superior training and equipment. There, said quietly, pointing to a section of corridor where the emergency lighting cast shadows that didn't match the physical objects creating them. It's phased about 60% into our dimension, close enough to observe but not solid enough to interact with physical matter. Activated her dimensional sensors and confirmed his assessment. How did you know? Tapped his temple. Human eyes evolved to spot camouflaged predators. We're really good at seeing things that don't want to be seen. They reached Research Lab 7C to find 3 terrified scientists huddled behind an overturned table that would provide exactly 0 protection from a creature that could phase through solid matter. Dr. Aura, a distinguished researcher, had compressed herself into a tight ball of gas near the ceiling while her assistants, a young and oppressed themselves, against the far wall. The lights keep flickering, Dr. Aura pulsed in electromagnetic frequencies that betrayed absolute terror. Something's in here with us, but we can't see it. Stepped into the lab, and immediately the atmospheric pressure changed. The Shadow Stalker was reacting to his presence, shifting closer to full materialization as it sensed a new type of prey. Everyone stay exactly where you are, said calmly. Don't move, don't make sudden gestures, don't run. Positioned herself near the entrance, weapons ready but uncertain what to target. The dimensional readings are spiking. It's preparing to attack. Nodded, his attention focused on something the others couldn't perceive. I can see it now. It's beautiful, actually, like a living shadow with too many teeth. The way he described the nightmare creature with something approaching appreciation was profoundly disturbing to everyone present. Dr. Aura flickered between visible and invisible in what was probably unconscious mimicry of the predator stalking them. The question, continued conversationally, is whether it's intelligent enough to recognize a superior predator when it sees one. He stepped further into the lab, moving with the kind of fluid grace that made it clear why human locomotion was studied in military academies across the galaxy. The Shadow Stalker responded by materializing partially, its form becoming visible as patches of living darkness that moved independently of any light source. There you are, said softly, and his voice carried the same tone someone might use when greeting an old friend. The Shadow Stalker hesitated, its form wavering between dimensions as it processed this unexpected response. Most prey species reacted with fear, panic, or desperate flight responses. This creature was responding with recognition and something that might have been respect. Slowly reached into his pack and pulled out his multi-tool, configuring it to emit a low-frequency pulse that resonated in the dimensional frequency the Shadow Stalker was using to phase. The sound was barely audible, but it clearly had meaning to the predator, which fully materialized and regarded with what could only be described as curious interest. You're not from around here, are you? Said, and somehow everyone present understood that he was talking to the Shadow Stalker. Neither am I. Want to talk about it. What followed was the most surreal conversation in recorded history. Began producing various sounds, rhythmic patterns, and mathematical sequences while the Shadow Stalker responded with dimensional phase shifts, movement patterns, and what appeared to be deliberate manipulation of the local lighting. After several minutes of this exchange, turned to the others with an expression of genuine fascination. It's not a predator, he announced. It's an explorer. Its species evolved in dimensional space between star systems. It doesn't understand that solid matter beings can die permanently. To its people, physical death is just a temporary inconvenience. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Dr. Aura's research equipment, automatically recording what would become the most studied encounter in galactic history. It's been trying to communicate, continued, still maintaining eye contact with the Shadow Stalker. The arranged body displays, the stalking behavior, the phase shifting. It's all attempts to interact with us using its natural language. It doesn't realize that we interpret its communication as killing. Lowered her weapon slowly. How can you possibly know this? Smiled, and for the first time since the crisis began, it was a purely human expression of joy and discovery. Because I asked it, and it answered. The Shadow Stalker moved closer too, its form shifting through several dimensional phases in what was clearly a complex communication sequence. Responded with hand gestures, multi-tool frequencies, and verbal patterns that seemed completely random to everyone else, but obviously had meaning to the creature. It wants to go home, translated. Its exploration ship was damaged, and it's been stranded here for subjective decades. The preserve's containment systems have been preventing it from accessing the dimensional frequencies it needs to signal for rescue. Professor's voice crackled over the communication system as she coordinated with the arriving military teams. Are you actually having a conversation with a Class 5 extinction predator? Looked up at the communication pickup with the expression of someone who had just made the scientific discovery of the century. Professor, I'd like you to meet First Explorer Darkness Between Stars of the Confederation. It's been trying to file a formal first contact report for the past 37 years. The Shadow Stalker performed what was clearly a greeting gesture, its form creating patterns in the laboratory lighting that somehow conveyed dignity, intelligence, and profound relief at finally finding someone who could understand its situation. 2 hours later, sat in the station administrator's office, surrounded by military officials, experts, and diplomatic representatives who were still trying to process what had occurred. The Shadow Stalker, now properly introduced as First Explorer Darkness Between Stars, was in a specially configured communication chamber, working with linguists to establish formal translation protocols. Mr. Admiral of the Galactic Security Forces was saying, "What you accomplished today will fundamentally change our understanding of contact. However, I must ask, how did you know to attempt communication rather than standard containment procedures?" Consider the question while looking out at the stars through the administrator's office viewport. Because someone who kills for sport doesn't usually arrange their victims artistically. That kind of behavior suggests symbolic thinking, artistic expression, attempts at communication. Plus, it never actually killed anyone permanently. It always struck in ways that triggered medical intervention and recovery. He turned back to the assembled officials, and they were struck once again by the casual way this human student had unraveled a mystery that had baffled experts for decades. On Earth, when we encounter something that might be intelligent, our first assumption is that it probably is. Better to treat a smart predator like a person than treat a person like a dumb animal. Admiral made notes on his tactical, and if you had been wrong, if it had been genuinely hostile. His expression shifted slightly, and everyone present got a brief glimpse of why human combat specialists were recruited by military forces across known space. Then I would have killed it, he said simply, but that was Plan B. The silence that followed was broken by a communication from the translation chamber, where First Explorer Darkness Between Stars had successfully established contact with its home dimension. The Confederation was sending a rescue diplomatic vessel that would arrive within standard galactic time frames. Professor, who had arrived with the military response teams, approached with an expression of academic excitement that overcame her natural caution around species. What you've done here will revolutionize our approach to research. You've demonstrated that communication is possible with species we've classified as hostile simply because we didn't understand their intentions. Nodded, but his attention was focused on something else entirely. Professor, I've been thinking about our discussion of predator-prey dynamics. Yes. I think we've been looking at it backwards. You've classified humans as predators because we come from a dangerous world and we have aggressive instincts. But what if that's not what makes us dangerous? Professor's crystalline structure showed patterns of intense curiosity. What do you mean? Gestured toward the communication chamber where First Explorer Darkness Between Stars was coordinating its rescue. Every other species in the galaxy evolved in environments that taught them to avoid danger, to flee from threats, to hide from predators. You developed amazing technologies and peaceful societies, but you also developed the assumption that anything dangerous must be hostile. He paused, looking around at the assembled officials, who represented the most advanced civilizations in known space. Humans evolved in an environment where the most dangerous things were often the most intelligent. Our predators were smart, adaptable, and creative. So we learned to communicate with dangerous things instead of just avoiding them. We learned to assume that something that could kill us might also be reasoned with, negotiated with, or even befriended. The implications of his statement settled over the room like a revelation. Admiral spoke first, his voice carrying a tone of grudging respect. You're suggesting that humans aren't dangerous because you're predators. You're dangerous because you're optimists. Smiled, and for the first time since meeting him, his alien classmates and colleagues understood that his confidence wasn't based on superior fighting ability or advanced technology. It was based on the fundamental human belief that any problem could be solved if you were willing to take the risk of trying. Something like that, he said. We assume that intelligence and hostility aren't the same thing. We figure that most creatures, even dangerous ones, would rather talk than fight if you give them the option. Professor's academic excitement was now mixed with something that might have been awe. And if talking doesn't work? His expression shifted one final time, showing the steel core that lay beneath his optimistic assumptions about the universe. Then we fight better than anything else in known space, he said quietly, but we always try talking first. 6 months later, the Galactic Educational Council expanded the exchange program to include students from 12 human universities. The Confederation had established formal diplomatic relations with the Galactic Alliance, opening trade routes and communication networks that revolutionized understanding of multidimensional space. Completed his xenobiology degree with honors, and accepted a position with the newly formed Department of Communication, where his primary responsibility was developing first contact protocols for species previously classified as hostile. His former classmates still attended his lectures, though they now did so as colleagues rather than fellow students. They had learned that the most terrifying thing about humans wasn't their capacity for violence, but their willingness to assume that even the monsters might be reasonable if you just knew how to ask.